there, it's Christy with the Chirp YouTube channel. I'm very excited to talk to you today about how to help transitions go smoother with your child or with your classroom if you're a teacher of some kind. So examples of a transition are when it's time to switch from one activity to another, and a bad transition might be that you announce it's time to put our toys away, and your child falls to the ground and decides to have a tantrum. Or you tell your kids in your classroom that moms and dads and grandmas and grandpas are coming to pick everyone up, and there's one child who starts swearing and hitting and kicking and biting everyone and throwing toys. These are some examples of kids who have difficulty with transitions. And in fact, most of us have difficulty with transitions even if we don't know it. It's very sneaky. There are three different major kinds of transitions. And the first one is transitions between activities. So like moving from playtime with toys to story time, or moving from story time to snack time. So that's transitions between activities. There's also transitions between settings on the same day. So this might be switching places, going from home to school, school to daycare maybe, or school to home, that kind of thing. Those can also be difficult. There are also transitions between programs, and these are more of a not in the same day sort of transitions, but maybe moving from preschool to kindergarten, or moving from an early childhood classroom like a 0 to 3 program into preschool, things like that. Usually kids, unless they have a more significant diagnosis like an autism spectrum disorder or Down syndrome or something like that, most children don't have a huge amount of difficulty with transitions once they pass through kindergarten, first grade. And whether or not your child is in the early childhood age category or older than that, if your child is having extreme difficulty with transitions, you're experiencing a lot of behavior difficulties or a lot of aggression or that kind of thing when a transition is taking place, it's usually a sort of a red alert that there's something else that might be going on. Not necessarily that there's a diagnosis that needs to take place. Sometimes there's just behaviors that need to be taught that maybe should be identified by a professional. I'm going to put some links down below to how to find a speech-language pathologist. That is a great way to start if you're having difficulty in this area. And you can also contact your public school's special education department and request an assessment or an evaluation if you think that would be helpful. And I usually do think it would be helpful, because even if your child doesn't qualify for services, they can give you recommendations about areas where your child could use a little bit more support, or other professionals who could help you with the areas where your child is struggling a little bit. So we know and we understand now there are different kinds of transitions, and all transitions can be difficult for children. Why? Why should they be so difficult? Well, there are a few reasons for that. Number one, the child could be leaving an activity he really enjoys. For example, if he enjoys playing trains, you tell him it's time to be done playing trains and time to do something else, he's going to be sad because he's leaving the trains. Number two, the child is going to an activity he doesn't enjoy. If a child has a lot of difficulty with sitting still at story time, for example, and story time comes right after free play time, that child is going to have a lot of difficulty transitioning from free play time to story time because he doesn't like story time and he really likes playtime. Number three, the child may be upset about a transition because he didn't feel as if he was finished with the activity that he is leaving. This usually happens with things like building, so maybe blocks or maybe Legos or something like that. Or it happens with art because he didn't finish his project the way that he meant to finish it. And so there are ways that we can talk around all of these difficulties to make them a little bit less upsetting for the child. The fourth thing is that a child expects to be required to wait during the transition. This is super frequent that the teacher or the parent will say, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up. We got to transition to the next activity. We're all headed out. And then the child stands by the door all ready and has to wait until everybody else is ready. And children usually don't like standing and waiting and having all that empty time. Because really, who of us likes that? Not very many of us. And the fifth thing is that the child is really uncertain about the expectations during the transition. Transition times are when a lot of behaviors happen. A lot of times in schools, aggression between students happens during transitions, not really during teaching time or playtime. Teasing a lot of times happens during transitions, waiting for the bus or standing in line waiting to go to lunch, things like that. That's the time when the unfortunate and uncomfortable things happen. And it makes a lot of sense if you think about, for example, maybe you are sent to a conference for work. And this is going to be a conference where you're expected to learn some stuff, you're expected to take some notes, and then you're going to go back to work the next day. Well, what is the most uncomfortable time of that conference for you? Is it the time where you're sitting and listening to the speaker and taking notes? Probably not. You know what the expectations are. The most uncomfortable time is probably the time as you're moving into the conference area, when the conference has breaks, when there's lunch maybe, or maybe when you're moving out of the conference area. Because that's when it's a little uncertain. Where do we pick up our confirmation that we have registered for this conference? Is there breakfast? Are there drinks? How do I get up and go to the bathroom if I need to? Was this teacher even going to be interesting? What if I have a question? Should I sit on an aisle or should I sit in the back in case I need to walk around? All those kind of things. Those things are what are uncertain in the transition periods. And your children kind of feel like that too during periods where it's unstructured and where they're moving from one thing to the next. So it kind of makes sense. It's really important to hear your child and to help your child express his feelings more appropriately. For example, for a less verbal child who's having a little bit of a tantrum because playtime is finished and it's time to eat dinner or something like that, you may listen and say, I feel angry. So you're saying this from the child's perspective, so the child hears his feelings expressed in a way that it would be appropriate for him to repeat. That's very important. I'm going to put a link to a video that I did on something called as if speaking, which is speaking as if you are your child. So it gives him a mantra in his head, a script, if you will, to follow so that he can say it exactly like that and it would be appropriate. So if you model for him, I feel angry, in his head he's saying, I feel angry, and then sooner or later what's going to come out is I feel angry, which is an appropriate response. But you also want to model for the child that this is not the end of the world to feel angry. We can feel angry, and we probably, all of us, feel a little bit angry every single day. And that's part of being human. And so you could say something like, I hear you. You feel angry. But guess what? We can play more toys after we take a bath tonight. And you might want to start talking about time, using time words as you talk about these things with young children. So you can say, now is time to clean up. Next is dinner. After dinner, time for bath. After bath, more play. And so it sounds very exciting. And your child can start repeating those things too and getting in his head the way that the routine goes. Playtime is never done forever. It's just done for a little while. So it's good to respond to the frustration after you hear it. Children really do need to be heard. And I heard a very wise saying once from a friend of mine who's a very good mother. And she said, if you listen to children when they're very young, they'll tell you about the important things in their lives when they're older too. when you choose to listen to your children, they share things with you. They share their heart with you. They share their feelings with you. And those things are important for children to share with their families. Because later on, those things are going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and you still want them to feel that you heard them, even when they were young. Because those feelings to them are a big deal. Perhaps he has never had that feeling before. He's little. It's all brand new to him. So we need to help our children learn how to express their emotions and then sort through them and sort of problem solve them, even if they can't change them. So I'm going to give you a little plan here for how you can help transitions be smoother. And the first step is notice what is currently happening. Do your students know what cleanup means? Do your students know what the next activity will be? Does your child know how to get ready to go? What does that actually mean? Is there an organized place to put things that the students are cleaning up? Does your child have a way to ask for help if the process is too big? Does your child have a way to opt out of a full participation in any particular activity? So can he just do part of the next activity, which seems totally terrible to him right now? Can he just do it a little bit? Can he just watch? Are those things options? Or is he going to have to do the whole thing and that's too much? Is your child frustrated because he's not finished with his current activity, and how can we address that? So those are some questions to ask yourself as you're looking at how things currently are. Step number 2 is look for missing skills and teach them. So you want to make sure that there's a place for everything in your home or your classroom, and that things are labeled with pictures, especially if your child is not a reader yet. So for example, the train set has a picture of trains on the front, and the shelf that the trains go on also has the same picture of trains. So all the little tiny train pieces go in that bin, and the bin goes on that shelf. And every time you say clean up trains, that's exactly what you mean. Teach your child to put on his shoes and get his water bottle ready, and make him a visual checklist of all the things that he needs to be ready to go. So he knows when you say get ready to go, it means get my water bottle, put my shoes on. I don't know what else you might add on that list. Maybe sunscreen or a winter coat or whatever it is, depending on where you live and what your child's activity will be. But children don't automatically read your mind, and they don't automatically know what you mean when you say get ready to go. So make it more concrete. Teach your students the phrases they need to ask for help with cleaning up. Sometimes you say clean up and the kid looks at this huge mess that he made with toys everywhere, or a bunch of students look at the mess they made and they think, where do we even start? This is so huge. And so problems start, behaviors start to get out of the process of cleaning up because it seems too big. This is sort of what adults do when we procrastinate. We look at a project, it seems too big, we can't even get our brain around breaking it down into smaller pieces, and so we just avoid it by looking at Pinterest or watching things on YouTube. That's what your child is doing by having these negative behaviors. So we want to make sure that they have a way to ask for help. And we're not going to do it for them. We want to do it with them. And we're going to do as little as possible that helps them get on the right track. So we can say, oh look, here's the train's bin. Let's put the train tracks in the bin, in the bin, in the bin. And we're silly about it. We make it kind of fun. The kids all participate. And then we say, and the bin goes on the shelf. And so we make the routine enjoyable, and we help just enough to ease the process for the children. Explain that if your child's a little anxious about the next activity, you can explain over and over as the days go by that it's okay to just do a little art. It's okay to just sing and not dance at music. It's okay to stand in the corner and not sing or dance at music if that's too much today. Or it's okay to dance and not sing. That's okay too. In fact, we have a little tent. If the music is too much for you today, you can hide in the tent today. That's okay. So this is called graduated participation. So children can decide from day to day, especially our kids with sensory disorders or with diagnoses of various kinds. It's very difficult for them to manage their own behavior from day to day, and we want to encourage their ability to manage it by allowing them differing levels of participation depending on their abilities that particular day. So, for example, I know myself, I know that on certain days I can go full out and I can get tons of stuff done and it's going to be a great day and I'm going to be really productive. The next day, though, I might be tired, I might be grumpy, I might be really emotional because something difficult happened to me, and I know that I need to take it a little easier on myself that day. It's the same way for kids, and we need to teach them that that's part of being human, and we give them phrases to express that, like, I need to have some time by myself, I don't want to dance today, just sing, things like that. Give them options, and that makes the transition to the coming activity less burdensome. If your child is upset because he didn't finish the previous activity, explain that there will be some free time later in the day or later in the classroom hour to finish activities that he didn't get to finish earlier. There will be time for sort of catch up where he can do whatever it is he didn't get to finish. He'll be able to finish baking that pretend pizza in that pretend oven, or he'll be able to finish coloring that painting that he was doing. And it's not the end of the world just because this particular time slot for coloring is over. We can do it again a little bit later. Step number 3, make your transition as organized as possible. Before you attempt to change the behavior, make a list of what you'd really like to see, and then make an action plan. You want to really be prepared for this. So first of all, I really recommend that you have a visual schedule for your home or your classroom. I'm putting an example of that up on the screen right now so you'll be able to see it. Sometimes seeing an example makes it a little easier to picture what that might look like in your own situation. Take pictures of each activity and tape the pictures or magnet or Velcro, whatever kind of connector you want to use, on the wall or the fridge or wherever you wish to put it. When activities finish, take those pictures down and point to the next activity on the list. Say stuff like first and next. Those are really great time words to teach. You might point to the pictures and say, first we will eat breakfast, then we will get dressed. Or maybe now we will play toys, next we will eat lunch. So use a lot of these time words and help your child get used to first, then, next, before, after, things like that. Those are really useful because a lot of our children early on in their lives, it's totally natural, they don't understand that just because an activity is finished for right now, that it will come again. So they often think, especially at a very early age, that finished means they never get to play trains again. So you can understand why there would be some feeling of sadness about that. If you'd like to have your child put the cars back in the box and on the shelf when cleanup time comes, make sure there's a box with the pictures of cars on it, and make sure there's a specific spot on the shelf that also has the picture of the cars on it, so that makes it very easy. If you have your students out at playtime, out in a gated-in sand playground area, if you're a preschool teacher or something like that, and you want them to get their sand toys in the bin and line up at the gate, you might consider something like one round paving stone for each student in your class. You might use the phrase, line up, have the students bring whatever toy they're playing with them as they stand on their paving stones, and then you hold the bin. And as they walk back to the classroom, each one of them drops their toy in the bin. Very convenient and very easy to implement. But, of course, we have to teach these procedures. over and over, and we have to really heavily reinforce them for many days and many weeks. So you might want to try special transition toys like spinning things, pinwheels, hats, flags, light up spinners for the first kids who follow the routines or for the ones who really have difficulty with transitions. Number 4, prepare extensively for your transition. You want to have visuals of each activity available, and 10 minutes beforehand you want to call out 10 minutes, and you want to set the visual timer. The bigger the better, but I have little tiny ones to show you in a minute. And have a visual schedule in your room or your home like I mentioned. When it's almost time to move to the next activity, you take down the picture. Let's say we're moving from playtime to story time. So I would take down the picture of playtime. I would say 10 minutes until story time, and I would point to story time, and I would take my visual timer and I would set it for 10 minutes. This is one visual timer by a company called Time Timer, and this one is very small because I used to do home therapies, and I put this one in my bag. When I got to a client's house, I would set it for 55 minutes. It depends on how long a therapy session was, but usually actually 50 minutes because I had then some time with the family at the end to talk about what we had worked on and how they could follow up with that. But as the time ticked on, the child was never surprised. I would bring her attention to the timer frequently, and when the time ran out, it would make this nice little beeping noise, pretty quiet, but loud enough that the child would, after a while of spending time with me on a weekly basis, the child would just automatically start cleaning up at that time. And so it's a really good prompt because it's not you saying the time is over, it's the timer. They can blame the timer. This is great too for if you have students who have difficulty getting things done in a certain amount of time. If you say, okay, you have 10 minutes for art, so whatever you want to get done needs to get done within 10 minutes before the red is gone. So the time timer is a great option. I'm going to turn it off so it doesn't surprise me later. Also, I have this timer. On this one, that's what 10 minutes looks like. This timer is a pie timer by a company called Joseph. It's just a kitchen supply company. They're not even specialized for people, preschools or people with special needs or anything like that. It's just a great timer. This one ticks really loudly. I have some students who can't handle that really loud ticking. I don't know if you can hear it, but it's pretty loud. I don't love that either, but some kids really like it because it reminds them constantly that time is passing, and that then the ding at the end isn't as shocking. Oh my goodness, it's gonna go on forever. This one's a little better for classrooms because the ringing is noisier and you can usually hear it at least a little bit over the students if they're playing. So there are a couple examples of visual timers, and there are more. And Time Timer also has one that's 12 inches by 12 inches, which is great for putting on a shelf in the playtime area especially, and allowing the students to see how much time is on it. And there are some that hang on the wall, and there are some that you can wear on your wrist. They're pretty great. Oh, and all those links I'll put down below in the info box so that you can go investigate them should you choose to. So after 5 of those 10 minutes have passed, you want to announce again, 5 minutes until story. Make it seem really exciting, make it seem really fun, and keep announcing this. So announce it again at 3 minutes, draw attention to the timer again, point to story time again. Do the same thing at 2 minutes, do the same thing at 1 minute. When the timer rings, hold it up and say, playtime is finished. Time to get ready for story time. I recommend teaching your kids a cute little cleanup song because then you can all sing it together. And usually by the time the song is done, most of the cleaning up is done too. I have a couple additional helpful hints on this topic. And the first one is try to balance in your day or in the hour that you have with your students at church or in your home, try to balance really active activities with quieter ones. And this sort of helps your child to self-regulate a little bit and to manage his energy level a little better. Things stay a little more stable. Give students enough time in any particular chunk of activity time to finish projects for the most part. You're always going to have kids who lag. You're always going to have kids who get done really early, but make it a reasonable amount of time so that the particular students that you have or your particular child can reasonably finish whatever it is that he really is working with enjoyment on. Remind and reinforce frequently. As students arrive in your classroom, remind each one to pick out one of your toy centers and go there. As your child gets home from school, encourage him to choose a book and sit in his beanbag for some quiet time to wind down. When you know families are on their way to pick up the students, remind your students to tell their families one exciting thing that happened that day. I had a really surprising little guy and one time in a classroom, and every time his mom would show up at the window to pick him up, he would start using the F word and kicking all of us. And it was really shocking. He had such trouble with transitions that this would be the result. And his mother was a lot less structured than we were in the classroom, and he didn't do well in unstructured environments. And so transitioning back to his mom was really challenging. With us, he barely had any behaviors except during that one period. And with her, he had lots and lots and lots of them. So, not that he was perfect or anything, but he was better able to manage himself with a lot more knowledge of what the expectations were. I'll put it that way. And so what we taught him in advance was, when mom's coming, what are we going to tell her today? And he would come up with, I painted a picture, or we talked about elephants, or whatever it was. And we prompted that from him like 10 times in the last 2 minutes before we knew his mom was going to be there. And it started going from the F word and kicking and hitting to, Mom, we talked about elephants. And I was really impressed with how well that strategy worked. So try it. It's a good one. You also want to teach your students to help other students follow the routines. Kids are so proud of themselves when they learn to follow your routines. Kids really like consistent routines. They like knowing what to expect. They like knowing where things are, where they're supposed to put stuff when they're done with it. They like knowing that they come into class, they hang up their coat, and they go to the free play area. Kids feel comfortable knowing the expectations. So if you can encourage all of your kids who love that to help each other, oh, you hung up your coat, that's great. Let's go to the free play area together. That sort of peer encouragement can be really helpful too. If you have one particular child who's having an especially difficult time making a transition, you might consider allowing him to temporarily carry an item with him from, for example, from the free play area to story time. And this acts as a reminder. He can kind of pretend that he's still at free play because he's got this cow or whatever with him. And it allows him to still feel as if he's doing the previous activity, even though it's clearly story time now. Of course, once he gets sucked into the fun of story time, I think you should surreptitiously sneak in and remove the cow as long as it's not upsetting to him. And eventually, over the course of weeks, he probably won't even need to bring the cow with him to story time anymore. And if he does, you can always incorporate the cow into the story time. For example, have the cow read the story, or have the cow sit in a chair and do what all the rest of the kids are supposed to be doing. So it can become a fun part of your next activity as well. It doesn't have to just be a huge distraction to everyone. Use regular phrases to help your students stay calm and transition smoothly. So as your kids are cleaning up, you might repeat stuff like, I clean up and then I go sit on my circle. I clean up and then I go sit on my circle. Or with the playground example, you might say, walk through the gate, drop my toy in the bin. Walk through the gate, drop my toy in the bin. These kind of things are really helpful to kids because they get in their head what the routine is, and they like following routines, so it turns out well for everybody. And I want to repeat here that if your child is having extreme difficulty with transitions, or if you notice that your child is almost incapable of disengaging from a really highly preferred activity, a lot of times those are things like trains or spinning things or video games or things like that. If your child gets aggressive with you or starts swearing at you, if you move him away from a particular activity to something else, that's a signal that there's probably something else developmental that needs to be addressed. And it's not necessarily a terrible thing. It's going to be much better once it gets addressed. And so I definitely recommend that you find a good professional who can help you work through that with your child so that it can be easier for everyone and so that your child can be more functional and not so tied into that sort of, this is my thing right now and I can't stop. We don't want any child to be boxed in like that and overly tied to a certain activity or structure. So once again, I have that list of speech language pathologists down in the info box. And you can also at any point contact your public school, as I mentioned, and request a screening or an evaluation. And they are required to do it for you. This is an area where a little bit of planning and a lot of consistency can make a huge difference, not only for you and for your child, for your whole family or your whole classroom. And so you can do it. You can make that huge difference for your family, your classroom, your child, and yourself, and give everybody a lot more peace and a lot more comfort in the routines that you set up. So good luck. I hope you have fun, and I hope you find some routines that work well for everybody. If you have questions, leave them below, and don't forget to subscribe. Click on that little birdie right down there in the lower right-hand corner to subscribe so that you will never miss any of these fabulous videos. I hope you learned a lot today and that you have a lot to think about, and I will see you in my next video.